This is Continuum Drag, a weekly podcast revisiting television sci-fi, fantasy, and everything in between. This week, Kolchak, episodes 3 and 4.
September 2nd, 10 p.m. Leon Van Heusen, single, ambitious, slightly paranoid. By day, a television repairman. By night, an observer, a man with a purpose. The author of Mathematico, a universal language that Leon has refined for use in unconventional communication.
Welcome to Continuum Drag, the podcast that flips through the newspaper directly to the spooky pages. I'm Luke, here with my co-host Jordan. What's real, Jordan?
I'm going to give you my favorite line from these two episodes, and it's one of the narrations that Kolchak gave. He said, what can you expect from a city that erects a building to look like a stack of flapjacks and where some of the men dust their eyebrows with glitter? I thought, how about that, Kolchak?
He's got some real problems with masculinity, that Kolchak.
Yeah. Well, which is funny, too, for a man who is... I wouldn't put masculine as one of the main traits of describing him.
I think he would.
Oh, yeah, baby.
But it's true. I what I like about his character is I think there is that level of like certain masculinity, but then anytime he's in any sort of tense situation, he's like screaming, shrieking, and falling all over himself. It's very funny. It's a good character trait.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, this week we have a returning guest joining us. Jane, welcome back to the show.
Thanks, guys. I'm so excited to be back. It's been quite some time since I've been on the show.
Yeah, when
I've
were
been
you
looking
here
forward
last?
to this. It was like 2 years ago.
I bet it was the Stephen King thing.
Yes, it was the Langoliers.
That's
right.
Yeah,
which I forced you guys to do.
That was so good. We talked about it every day.
I know. I really appreciated that you guys did that with me. I'm sorry that it was such a bad TV movie, but I really enjoyed doing it.
It's fine.
Looking back, I don't remember it so badly. You know, it's one of those things where you look back, I'm like, yeah, it was all right. I remember a lot of Bronson Pinchot sweating.
Yeah, see, this is the thing. This was always my memory of the Langoliers, is that it was kind of interesting because basically you end up remembering like the concept of it, not the actual execution of it, because the concept is sort of captivating in this way. Anyways.
I mean, it's fine. We were going to watch a Stephen King thing either way. It just that way it ended up being the Langoliers.
It was great. But I'm happy to be back, and I'm super excited that you guys invited me back for Kolchak because it's a show that I had heard about from when I was young and I never sought it out and I never watched it, and it was a really great opportunity to check it out.
Nice. So you had heard of Kolchak before this. That's good.
Well, I had because of the X-Files, because literally every single thing about the X-Files, Chris Carter would say he was a big fan of Kolchak the Night Stalker and wanted to make a show that was similar to that.
Well, that's good. I forgot you're a resident X-Files super fan.
Yeah, so I was a super fan in the 90s, and it was kind of the publicity line that kept coming up. Like anytime there was an article or something about it, he would talk about that. Actually, knowing that, I expected a slightly different type of show than what we actually got in Kolchak.
I was going to ask you, do you see a similarity between the X-Files and this, either thematically or a through line of, obviously they're both paranormal investigative shows, but do you think there's anything else that kind of you would know this is in some ways a precursor to the X-Files?
I don't think that if you just watched it, you wouldn't say, oh my gosh, this is like the X-Files, because it's not like the X-Files. The tone is entirely different. The lead character is a reporter. He's not a police officer or an FBI agent or anything like that. The tone is like so light and funny and quirky. But I can see how it would have captivated the imagination of like a young person with the idea that, so I was trying to think about like, what is it about this show that would have made it kind of different from the other stuff that was on TV at that time. And maybe you guys, I don't know if you have talked about this already when you did the first 2 episodes. But I think the fact that it was like paranormal stuff, but that was very rooted in reality. Like he has this like very dragnet kind of way of speaking, and everything just seems like pretty normal. All the police officers are like normal guys, and there's not actually a lot of quote unquote spooky stuff in it. And the music sounds like a cop show, and it's all like, it's very procedural in a lot of ways. So I think that contrast between it being this paranormal stuff in an ordinary world, and that combined with this whole idea of the cover up, which I think is really what probably Chris Carter and the X-Files was really into, is this idea that the government is constantly covering up these things, that these things are happening in day-to-day life, and they're happening around the corner and down the street. And there's always some sort of like civic improvement project that has covered up the evidence of the UFO or whatever it is. And I think that was super, and it was across a lot of sort of the zeitgeist in the 70s, obviously, because of Watergate and all the political cover-ups that were happening. So
when I was watching these episodes, that's what I was sort of realizing. I think maybe this is where the crossover with X-Files comes, is it feels very post-Watergate. Like, your hero's a reporter, every cop you can't trust, the government is in the background, like, covering things up. And I think in that way, like, the X-Files was also that sort of reactionary, like, you can't trust what's being told to you kind of thing. It like captured like a moment in time. I think maybe that's what Kolchak does well. That's sort of like the X-Files. It's just like, it's capturing a weird period of distrust.
Yeah. And it's super interesting actually, because I looked up the timeline of the Watergate kind of scandal to see how it matched up with Kolchak. And Kolchak is ahead of its time. Like, the first movie, did you guys do the movie? Did you guys watch the
I've
TV?
watched
Luke watched them though.
Yeah. So the first one is in 1972. Which is before the Woodward and Bernstein published their book and before a lot of this stuff came to light about, I guess there was some paranoia and there were some suspicious things happening. But even by 1974, so the show came out in 1974, which means it would have been written a year or so beforehand, probably, and filmed a year or so beforehand. But it still feels like very 1976. I know that sounds weird, but it's right on the cusp, and it's quite clever in that way. I think it was just sort of anticipating a lot of what was happening.
Could be. I mean, it definitely feels like it's definitely pulling from like a tone or a feeling in the air for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that's what was going on. It's just by the time the X-Files comes around in the 90s, all that stuff is really obvious. Like government cover-ups and Deep Throat and all of this is like, it's so much a part of the culture. Whereas I think in the 70s, it was just kind of in the news and people hadn't internalized it yet. So anyway, I think that's one of the reasons that the show is like not the tone that we expected, is that it does still have that kind of quirky, funny side to it, because I think nobody would have really committed to like a dark, earnest, the government is out to, corrupt your children and hide everything from you, because that hadn't quite happened yet.
We mentioned it, I think, the first podcast, though. There's a hint of that, though, in the opening credits with him whistling, and it's almost that, like, sort of Mary Tyler Moore sort of opening, and then suddenly it gets to, like, dark and creepy, and he's typing, and it's still my favorite. I love the last shot. I usually skip through the credits anytime we have to watch these shows, but I always watch the Kolchak ones because I like his just freeze frame on his face at the end. I'm like, ooh, spooky. Yeah,
like something's come into his office and is about to get him. Yeah.
It's the truth.
That's right.
Well, that was actually a very nice dissection of X-Files versus Kolchak. It was very good. I hadn't expected it. So maybe let's move on to the episodes.
Great. Oh, but the last thing is, did you notice that they use the X-Files font?
Oh, is that
all the episodes? That typed font that they use in all the Kolchak episodes is the same font that they use in the X-Files.
I never
There
noticed.
you go.
It takes an X-Files super fan to notice.
It does, especially since now if you watch the X-Files on streaming, it's a different font.
Is that right? Yeah,
because when they, I think when they converted it to HD, they didn't get the font. So I don't know why. It doesn't seem like it's that hard a font, but it's a different typewriter font.
So what you're saying is if there's any young kid out there experiencing X-Files for the first time, they're not really getting the true experience.
They're not. The only way to get it is to go back to the original episodes, which may or may not be available anymore.
Your parents still have them on VHS all piled up from you recording them when you were a teenager, right?
That is correct. Yes.
Well, I'll let you in a little secret. We're not watching the original Kolchaks either.
No.
Apparently the first 4 episodes of Kolchak the Night Stalker actually aired as The Night Stalker. That was the title of the show. And after 4 episodes, they rebranded it as Kolchak the Night Stalker. So there was a different not title sequence, but it had a different title when it came out. So we're not even watching the originals.
Oh, interesting. I guess they just, did they think that it was maybe just too confusing because the movie was also called The Night Stalker?
I think they realized the sell of the show was Kolchak, and it was time to really like focus in on that character, which I agree, like you 100%. The show should just be called Kolchak.
Yeah. I mean, I would watch Kolchak investigate anything. It does not have to be paranormal in nature. Like, I'm a big fan of his after watching 2 episodes.
I think the Night Stalker is just to really let you know. It's like Kolchak, the Night Stalker, like it was like Baywatch Nights.
Right.
You know?
It's going to be spooky.
Yeah. But for years, it's also confusing because is he the Night Stalker? He's not the Night Stalker.
No,
the Night Stalker was the vampire from the first movie. So that's what the other thing is, like, when I heard about this show initially and it was called Kolchak the Night Stalker, I thought that he was the Night Stalker and that he did like weird stuff at night.
I think he is the Night Stalker. I think my assumption was it was in a reference to him out at night chasing stories. But you're probably right that it's not actually him. In my head, I was just like, oh yeah, he's the Night Stalker.
But he stalks stories. Most of the show happens during the day.
That's true.
That's the other thing. I was first watching it. I'm like, where is all this night stalking that's supposed to be happening? He's driving around in bright sunlight in his convertible. So,
day strolling doesn't work as well.
Kolchak the Day Stroller? Yeah. I would maybe also watch that show.
That's just a spin-off. It's great.
It's just him getting his actual stories done. It's really just boring.
Got to get that byline.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, here is the IMDb summary for episode 3. They have been, they are, they will be. Kolchak connects a string of bizarre thefts committed by a powerful invisible entity that targets metal deposits to a string of suspicious animal and human deaths connected by the fact that the victim's bone marrow is missing.
That is an awesome summary.
I like right off the bat that we were worried that a couple of the characters we had in the first episode weren't going to come back, but Updike's back. And Marmelstein is back.
Yes. We got both Updike and Marmelstein back. I'm glad to see them both.
It adds to the show. You get a feel of the world and the universe we're working in. It's not like going to be he has different people working the office every week. It's just like, yeah, there's people that those are his coworkers.
I like that this episode opens with a twist on the first 2 episodes. Jane, you obviously didn't see the first 2 episodes, but both episodes start with a sort of a cold open in which, like, I think both of them, a woman is murdered, and it's kind of that sequence. This time we start off, it's the same idea. Someone's going to be unexpectedly murdered in the cold open. This time it's a cheetah. I was like, oh, what a twist. A cheetah's being murdered this time. How's Kolchak going to get involved in this cheetah murder?
Yeah, he very quickly, like, he has ears for everything. All he has to hear is that one animal died, and then he's like, but another animal died, and I already know about all these other animals who died, and he's on the case. Like, he's raring to go, that guy.
He keeps those notes because that's what's happening. Is back at the old INS newspaper office, the Cubs are in the World Series, and Kolchak is trying to weasel a ticket to the game out of old Updike, who I guess for some reason has become the new sports editor for the episode.
I think it's a small office. I think they have to rotate their the parts of the paper they write.
Exactly. And he gets that ticket, but when Vincenzo comes by and mentions that this cheetah has died, that really stirs Kolchak's interest. He knows about the previous deaths of a panther and a panda, and he's like, this sounds like a story for me.
That's where Kolchak and I are different. If I heard a bunch of animals died, I wouldn't think there's a story for me. I think, oh, that's a shame. Animals died.
I was like very concerned about this zoo. I'm like, this zoo sounds like highly abusive and like
they're
really
like
not taking care of their animals. Like maybe that's the story. Yeah.
That's the real story. I did like at some point he goes to visit the veterinarian who works there, and she complains about the dead panda because they can't get another one because the commies have all the pandas.
That was great. I loved it. They're in Tibet. The commies have them all. That woman is a longtime character actress. I forget her name, but like she was one of the nuns from Sister
Act. Yeah.
At any rate, Kolchak hops in his car to head to the zoo to report on the story and hopefully get to this Cubs game, which, spoiler, he's never going to make it to that Cubs game. But on his way, he picks up something on his old in-car police scanner about an officer being down at the Ray 9 electronics store. When he arrives there, he, as usual, arrives in the middle of a police SWAT movement. Cops are swarming the building. It's pure chaos. And as they surround the building, one of the walls to this electronics store just bursts out. It's just like bricks everywhere. Cops are flying through the air by the sheer force of the explosion.
So much somersaulting happening, just like somersaulting over cars, flipping themselves backwards. Like, I think the gymnastics budget on this show is quite high, and it occurred in several other episodes as well. I think maybe people were just really into somersaulting in the 70s.
I loved it. I think we're missing that in TV shows now. I like the cutaway to someone doing a huge flip over a car. I'm like, that is a big explosion.
It was great.
It is.
And a lot of wind. There's a lot of blowing of things.
That's right. In this episode particularly, I like that on this show. It just seems like they just have so much budget for police extras, and they're also just there to get tossed around like rag dolls, which makes me laugh every single time.
I was shocked at how big these like set pieces were when the police in throughout this episode and the next episode, when the police would arrive somewhere, there would be like 6 cop cars and like 16 extras, and we need
to cut the police budgets. That's too many cops.
You don't need that many cops for this. Anyway.
Yeah, and inside the wall, the police and Kolchak gather around the hole that's been blown in this wall, and what they see is pallets full of lead ingots just stacked up.
What is a lead ingot?
I think it's like a bar of gold, but it's lead instead.
But why? Is it valuable?
I think it's used for processing. I think it's just the shape they choose to transport it, and it's used for processing whatever lead items. I think. I could be wrong. We'll have to have some sort of ingot expert write in.
Okay.
Well, and I think we later find out that this Ray 9 Industries, which owns this electronics store, they're like a big like multinational conglomerate who like they run an electronics store, but they also make missile control systems for the U.S. military. So like I think they're just like supposed to be this large electronics like firm that might have like lots of pieces for making. I guess that was for circuit boards, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it wasn't clear.
But they have it.
The point is, a big hole is being knocked out of the wall. So there's a big hole, and they're all watching this big pallet. I think it's just one pallet, isn't it, Luke?
I think there's 3 of them. There's quite a few.
Okay, so there's a few pallets of ingots, and they just disappear, and everyone sees it, which I liked because it wasn't just Kolchak. It wasn't one of those, like Pokeroo. He's the only one who sees it. It's that's only a reference for Canadian kids in the 1980s. So it all disappears. They all see it, and Kolchak's like, "What?"
It's great. He's like, "Did you guys all see that?" And he immediately gets ejected from the crime scene as the feds show up in their black suits. He's like, "No, you didn't see anything, Kolchak. Get out of here."
Mm-hmm.
Almost immediately, the police officers who are staring at it immediately decide that they didn't see it. Like that second, like Kolchak is like, "What is that?" And they were like, "Oh, they must not have been there." Or I can't remember what they said, but it was just like immediately they just.
But that is the theme, and Luke mentioned it, and I think the last podcast, that there is a feeling of, if not anti-authority, definitely anti-police in this, and police are always seen as a way to stop the truth from coming out as a like tool of subterfuge. They're just there to kind of get in the way, and they're not really doing anything other than cleaning up stuff. That's really how the police are being seen in this show.
Yeah, I mean, the police's first instinct is to lie.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's also, I mean, going back to like the X-Files and the paranoia stuff, is the fact that the show feels like a police procedural, but he's not a policeman. He's a reporter.
And he doesn't like police.
And he doesn't like the police, but he narrates like a Dragnet kind of narration, right? And the format is very similar. I can't remember where I first heard about this, but I don't heard about it, but like basically if you look at like genres, if you look at the genre of the police procedural versus the genre of a mystery, they're both very similar in that there's something that happens that like a problem or an issue or a crime that has to be solved. But in the mystery, you follow the characters as they uncover what happened, and you tend to not see, with the exception of maybe seeing a murder with like a mysterious hand at the beginning of a show, you won't see the crimes continuing. But in a police procedural, you tend to see the police and the criminals, or the police and whatever the thing is, happen like back and forth. And then over time, the police hone in and catch the criminals. And so you actually have that with Kolchak also, because he actually narrates moments where he is not present.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll go away, it'll show something happening, one of these paranormal attacks or something, and he'll have his voiceover. So in that sense, like, it's exactly set up like a police procedural, except he's not the police.
No, for sure. It's definitely cribbing those notes. It just decided like we wouldn't, I guess it's just weird. It's like we wouldn't want to watch this, I guess, from that perspective. It doesn't, I guess the creators were like, you wouldn't want to watch this from the police perspective because their job would be to cover it up, I guess.
Yeah. Or they would solve it and then the mystery would be over. The show would be done. police would do their job properly, and then there would be no more show.
I also like the voiceover on this show, and I generally don't in TV shows, but I know it's a stylistic choice to kind of have that like gumshoe kind of feeling to it, which I think works. And then also it's a real time saver. You know, he can, like you're saying, Jane, if he's not there, he's like, oh, and then the person went through the door and that's why they're there, and they can get through things quickly. And I think they use it pretty effectively in this show, as opposed to some of the voiceovers you sometimes see where it's just like, you're just repeating exactly what the viewer's already seen. Like they're actually using it in a pretty functional way.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was actually, when you watch the original TV movie as well, which was even better written in terms of the voiceover, like it was very good at just like jumping from moment to moment and letting the voiceover really lead us in an interesting direction instead of just repeating what was going on. It was cool.
Did you watch both original movies?
I didn't watch the second one yet. I watched the first one.
Fair enough.
I'm going to watch the second one.
We'll get back to this episode, I suppose. Kolchak leaves the scene of this crime to head to the zoo, where he finds like the cheetah cage has a similar like blown out nature. Like all the bars are blown out like it was at the electronics store, and he discovers this like looks like a black obsidian ore on the ground, but he keeps claiming it's like, oh, it's real sticky, everybody. Trust me, it looks like it's hard, but it's very sticky.
That was funny. That's what he kept saying, and it was just a weird thing that I don't know why they just didn't change it in the script, because it clearly wasn't sticky, but everyone, for some reason, they needed it to be sticky. But I'm like, look at it. It doesn't look sticky at all. It looks like a rock.
Yeah, I thought that maybe it had congealed, like it had started out being sticky, and then it had hardened. I was confused by the description of it being sticky.
I think the writers had hoped they'd get some goo for him to handle, and they ended up getting him a rock, and then nobody kind of ended up like writing a fix into that. But it's fine. It was just very funny. He finds this thing, and as he's sort of looking at this like sticky black goo, he's reminded of a call that came on a radio show he heard as he was driving over, which is
so coincidentally everything fits together.
Very, very true for the Kolchak show. But he heard a man calling into a radio show complaining about sticky black goo all over his driveway that he blamed on city road construction. So Kolchak, after making a few dead-end phone calls, finally just drives over to Mariposa Lane and finds that all the black goo is gone since that apparent phone call. But the man who owned the house happens to come out and says, oh, it's so weird. I called the radio show. Midway through my conversation, they cut me off the air, and then an hour after that, the city showed up to remove the black sticky stuff from my lawn. They tried 3 ways. Did you guys catch the 3 ways they tried to remove the sticky goo?
One way was they tried to go at it with like a flamethrower.
Yep.
And burned his tree down and his bush, and like almost burned his house.
I believe the other one was a shovel, and then chemicals that turned his lawn yellow for some reason.
Oh, right.
I want to mention that, I don't know if you guys noticed, the actor was Dick Van Patten. He's a big actor
yes,
in the 70s.
I noticed that too.
Mm-hmm.
It was nice to see a bunch of people show up on this show.
Yeah, 8 is enough. I think that was his big show.
Jordan, these are the shows for you. These are where all your heroes live.
Did you guys see who the story consultant was on all of these episodes?
I did, yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
We'll get to it later. A little tease for you, audience. Anyway, this man, he basically gives them the rundown of what happened, and then he starts talking about how a lot of weird stuff has been happening in the neighborhoods. Lots of animal deaths have been happening. His neighbor was on his porch listening to his stereo, and someone just stole the stereo out from under him when he was listening to it. And then the cops later found just the chassis to the stereo, all the electronics removed, in a ditch down the street. What's happening in this world? The police aren't doing their job.
You remember the days when people just would steal TVs? Like, that does not even happen anymore. Like, electronics are so cheap that it's not even a criminal business plan to like steal somebody's television. Just doesn't work.
I bet somewhere around a TV still getting stolen.
I guess.
Maybe not in your bougie neighborhood.
Pawn that bad boy for $20. And so Kolchak also finds another piece of this like sticky goo sitting in it like left over from when the city came to clean up the mess. So he decides to go back to the zoo. There was a veterinarian he was talking to there who wouldn't give him much information, but now he's shown up with 2 pieces of sticky goo he's found, and he attempts to bribe her with some Cubs tickets to analyze the black substance. She's a little hesitant, as all characters on the show are, but finally she does come clean and explains that they've already looked at the black goo. They've discovered it's hydrochloric acid and acetone, which means that it's made from stomach acid and bone marrow, apparently. And she basically is able to theorize that all the animals who've been killed so far have had their bone marrow sucked out of them, I guess, sort of vampire style. And whatever did that seems to have then vomited up this black goo once it finished feeding, she figures.
I actually, at this point, when I heard this, kind of what you said, Luke, I thought it was going to be something along the lines of like a vampire, because that's what it seemed like. It was going to be some creature. We're going to find some sort of monster that, for whatever reason, had to feed on large animals, but it's not where this episode goes. And there's a little bit of a like, I don't know if this, it feels like maybe this was the direction they were going in, or maybe it's just me, but it just, I don't know if this entity we're going to find out, I don't know, did they explain why it needs to suck out bone marrow?
I think it's a bit of a misdirect, actually, because while they're doing this one thing where there's like seems to be a vampire on the loose sucking marrow out, there's this sort of secondary story of crimes happening related to electronics. Because, as you said, Kolchak will narrate these things, but he won't be present at these attacks. But there are a couple of humans who are killed too. Or Jane, as you mentioned, anytime a human's attacked, wind hits them. So I just kept
and then
writing.
They somersault backwards, and then
I was like,
done.
That guy just got winded.
Yeah.
But two people are killed. There's a purse snatcher who grabs a purse and then goes and hides in an abandoned building to go through it. And what he discovers is like the place is like filled with piles of like electronics, and he's then immediately murdered. And then we see a TV repairman who goes out into the woods to broadcast radio signals into space using his universal language that he's created. Jordan, I'm sure you remember.
Was he a TV repairman? Oh, he was just a member of that UFO group, right? He was a UFO enthusiast.
They specify Kolchak specifies his job.
Oh, okay. So
that
he was a TV
weird.
repairman and a UFO enthusiast.
Yes. And he created his own language, his own universal language.
Mathematico.
I like that the amount of work that was needed just to have this guy be out on like a ledge somewhere. It could have just been like anything, but they had to I was like, that's a lot of backstory for this guy.
That's Kolchak though. Every person who dies, he gives them a full biography. Like remember when those gangsters died? We had to learn about each individual gangster, who married whose sister, who used to be a boxer. None of them ever come back, but you just get like a full bio of every dead character.
I think it's great. I think it's one of the things that gives the show like its unique character, and it makes you feel like Kolchak as a writer has an actual voice. Because I think often, a TV series will create someone who's supposed to be a writer or some kind of artist, but it's just very generic and bland, and you never really see them, aside from like maybe seeing them typing. You never really get to consume their art. But Kolchak's writing, you get to hear every episode, and it has a very, very distinct voice.
So whose voice do you like better? Kolchak when he's typing and doing his voiceover, or when Scully at the end of the episode is typing on her computer? Who do you like better?
Kolchak has way more character than... I mean, I love Scully for so many reasons, but compared to Kolchak, and actually when you look at some of the episodes, particularly the early episodes of The X-Files where Mulder has voiceover, or anyone where Chris Carter wrote the episode and Mulder has voiceover, it's much more ornate. Like he does these but it's still not as clever as Kolchak.
There you go. Kolchak takes it.
That's right.
Well, getting back to the electronics for a second, I think what's happening here is like there's this dual crime happening. There's people dying, animals dying with marrow sucked out, but you've got this side thing of electronics going missing. And they talk about at that a few times that like this Ray 9 place is making missile control systems. And throughout this episode, the police are always at the crime scenes, but always off to the side, never speaking, are men in black suits. Probably like we're supposed to think federal agents who are also watching over what's happening. So as I was watching this, I was like, I was trying to figure out whether there's two crimes happening or whether it was like, is this like a military experiment gone awry? Like they're really toying with like what could possibly be happening here, because like the marrow doesn't seem to match up to the electronics till we get to the end. So it was kind of an interesting where I was just like, there were sort of dueling crimes happening that weren't clear to me as how they crossed over.
Yeah, I really felt to me like kind of a grab bag of stuff. And part of me was wondering if that was because it was still kind of early in the UFO mythology, in terms of like the public awareness of UFOs and what the sort of agreed upon story is of how UFOs operate and what they want and what they do to people. But I'm not sure. Maybe there was lots of UFO lore that was pre-existing, but it did seem like someone was like UFOs, and then they just randomly picked some stuff that sounded weird.
We can get into it at the end, because I actually think it all adds up by the end.
Oh, okay. You can explain it to me then.
Anyway, Kolchak then he heads over to see another returning character, Gordy
the Ghoul. Yep.
who's still running his death pool lottery.
Yeah, it's this show does a lot of things very well, and the building of the world is one of the things they do well, and stuff like this, like having these characters. Like, there's no reason for Gordy the what's the profession? He's
a mortician. He works
the
at
mortician. Yeah, whatever he is. There's no reason for him to also be running like a side gambling pool on like dead bodies, but it just like colors the character in the world, and I think I like that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Kolchak's there because he wants to get the autopsy report on the guard who was killed at the electronics store during the wall explosion. But before he can get it, Gordy's boss, Stanley, intervenes. And, of course, Stanley's, like, overly friendly, offers to definitely give Kolchak a reading of that autopsy report. And what he reads to him is just, like, everything was fine with him. He just died of a heart attack. But while he's doing this, Gordy really subtly, like, slides Kolchak the audio, the cassette tape of what happened at the actual autopsy, which was a very funny sequence of him sliding him a cassette tape. But when he listens to it, basically what he finds out is that just like the animals, this guard had all his marrow sucked out. So these things are all intertwined.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if the solution at the end of it was just a golden retriever? Just loves eating marrow?
Just chewed him up real good. Mm-hmm. Runs off with electronics.
Could be a dog from space.
Mm-hmm. Haven't seen that before.
And Kolchak sort of starts putting together these sort of like disparate elements, and including some things we didn't get to, that we kind of just see at like brief moments. Like he goes to a police press conference and notices his watch has stopped, and somehow notices the police chief's watch has stopped, the guy who was also at the last crime. So he's just like, oh, some sort of electromagnetic event happened at the electronics store. So that has something to do with this. And he takes all of these leads and goes back to, for this weird, very kind of funny comic scene with Vincenzo, he goes back to the office to try to convince Vincenzo to let him write this story. And because the Cubs are playing, and I guess their paper's covering it, the boss in New York loves the Cubs so much, he sent Vincenzo a private catered dinner in his office. Like, there's one butler serving Vincenzo food in his office. Is very fancy, but it's just at his office.
Yeah, I did not understand what was happening, except that it was just great fodder for a comedic scene in which Kolchak has to explain all of the ways in which people's marrow has been sucked out and they've been, variously injured and autopsied while his boss
Vincenzo tries to eat.
And Vincenzo is like, I have an iron stomach. And he just like starts to look iller and iller as he continues to eat and hear these stories.
I understood giving someone like a fancy dinner, but I've never heard of someone also providing their own personal butler/waiter.
It's the 70s, baby. All bets are off.
Do you know what I mean? It's not like he went to a restaurant and had his own personal server. That they've all come to him in his office.
Yeah,
they brought all that food to his office. This could
be like a new pandemic business model, guys. Have someone come and have a private butler serve you your meal kit.
Which course do you think was the brains course he was about to be served?
Like, how many courses in was it?
Yeah, because after he finishes this explanation for bone marrow, the butler's like, these are brains, and he puts on another plate. I'm just like, what course is the brains course?
I think it's third or fourth.
I would have thought so as well. Yeah, might have been like some kind of soup.
But really, we get this weird comic scene, and then Kolchak goes to like pull the photos he's taken of like the disappearing ingots and all his research out of their filing room. Which, what I loved about this is part of the world building the show does really well is he goes to their filing room, which is also the toilet.
There's like a bathroom stall.
And he goes there, all his stuff is missing, and he's like freaking out. And then he realizes old Monique Marmelstein, she's hiding in the stall in the storage room / bathroom, and she's just like, hey, listen, the feds are here. They threatened me with an IRS audit, so I just had to give them all of your files.
Yeah. And he's not nice. He's not nice about it at all.
I wish that we could have seen that scene, like, I think, or seen some kind of clues of that scene. And I think that's one of the places where the show like maybe falls down a little bit and might just be a budget thing or just like a time thing. But it's like, I would have liked to have seen like these guys leaving while Kolchak is arriving. Or
well,
like
it's funny.
Walking down the hall or something.
It is funny because they kind of do, because I think what we're supposed to get out of it, which I don't think they pull off perfectly, but I think because he storms out of the bathroom storage room with his stuff is gone. Marmelstein's let them take all his stuff. Busts back into Vincenzo's office, and what we see is the feds we see their backs as they walk away. And as he walks in, Vincenzo's like, story's off. The feds came in here. We're not doing this story anymore. And, Kolchak's like, why? And he's just like, I don't need another UFO story. And that's the big reveal of the episode when he says, I don't need another UFO story. Kolchak's like, wait a minute. is this all about UFOs? Is that what the government told you? And Kolchak's doubling down now. But I think you're right. The execution is not quite perfectly. And I think the idea is they wanted to keep these like, black suited federal agents like silently in the background, but it does kind of make a little an awkward transition here as they crush the story out of it.
Yeah, they're not quite as, and maybe it's I was expecting them to be a little bit more ominous. They're not particularly ominous. They're just sort of there's this annoying idea that they've done this.
No, they never speak, right? They never speak. Kolchak never talks to them directly. They're always just kind of in a car, like down the block.
Yeah, and they're foiling his plans, but not in any way that seems particularly like dangerous or worrisome. Just like in a way that's frustrating. That's
the government for you.
I guess that's the real bureaucracy for you. It's like it's the banality of evil right there.
At any rate, this leads the Kolchak to a monologue about how the government no longer takes reports on UFOs, but if you're very insistent, you'll end up at a private organization that I guess collects UFO reports. They're a bit of a alien believer society, I guess.
I love this. It was like a MUFON group or something.
Yeah,
it was fantastic.
I thought they were like supposed to be like almost like an alien abduction support group. Was that kind of what they were going for?
I think so.
Yeah, I think it would have been like a network, like a group for people that were interested in aliens. So anybody who thought they had seen a UFO or had read something like would come and just talk about it. And so they obviously had this wackadoo woman who felt that she had been on the flying saucer.
Yeah. He arrives at I guess at a big. They have a alien abductee meeting that day. That woman's just telling her story. Great story.
Yeah, it was such a great story. But also other people there's another guy at the meeting who like doesn't believe her. So
they welcome all types.
There's so much fodder for comedy. Luke, are you going to describe her story?
No, go for it.
Oh, well, I mean, basically her story involves what sounds like going to a bar on a flying saucer, being offered a drink, some kind of bourbon drink, and then having an alien with a many tentacled alien try to get fresh with her. And she rebuffed his advances and then hung out for a little bit longer and then left. And then there was something about the word wormwood.
Yes.
Which I don't quite remember how wormwood was.
I believe what she said is wormwood's not a dangerous star. It's a missile.
It's a missile because when you spell it backwards and upside down, it spells doom drum or something like that. And this other guy who's there is just obsessively trying to write down this word and try to figure out how it spells doom drum, and determines that it does not in fact spell doom drum when you read it backwards and upside down, and begins arguing with her about it. And then Kolchak just leaves. He's just like, okay, fine.
It's very funny. I kept waiting for that to be important to the plot. Not at all. Just this weird comedy sequence.
Yeah.
What Kolchak does get, though, is the guy who runs this place. He has recently received. Kolchak's asking if he's had any recent UFO reports in the last week or so, and apparently he did get one opus reported on Monday. What's an opus?
I don't remember.
No, me neither.
You guys, you're not paying attention to the sparkling details.
Wait. An opus. Wait, it's like a UFO. It's something. Shoot. I can't remember now.
An opus report is a one-party, unverified sighting.
Right. That's right. Yeah. That's
the details, great. Jordan, they're so fine. They're so detailed.
Yeah. I was looking in the other direction when that scene happened.
But basically what it was is this report was done by that now dead TV reporter at Snake Rock, which is where Kolchak heads next. Is he goes up there and he kind of like half drops in his monologue a little piece of information that maybe he should have seen it a little easier, but he's just like, given all the electromagnetic interference or whatever, I can probably use a compass to track this thing.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how that was going to work. Was the idea that whereas the compass normally you can use it to point north, it now was just directing its magnetism was pointing towards whatever this was? That was
exactly. That's the idea. They kind of drop it very suddenly, and that becomes a major way to track it. I mean, whatever. It's kind of a fun way, but it ends up leading Kolchak to a planetarium where inside there are 2 dead security guards in the planetarium.
Yeah, and one security guard we see before Kolchak arrives, we see one security guard find the other security guard who's already dead. And then that one security guard calls the police, but doesn't report that somebody's dead. He just says, you better get down here right away, in that very obvious TV way.
It's that thing I love in TV. It's like almost a commercial break thing. They used to do it on The Next Generation all the time, which was my favorite. It'd be like Riker would call up to Picard and they'd be like, what's on the planet? And he'd be like, trouble. And then they go to the commercial. I'm like, oh no, not trouble. I'm like, it's like, that's not providing any information, but it's real fun for a commercial break.
It's a very poor report, number one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then Kolchak shows up, and then they're suddenly both dead. Although I don't think we saw the second guard die or whatever.
No, they've both been killed. And the planetarium projector is turned on. It's starting to show various star maps on the ceiling. All these things are going. We're seeing all the controls moving on their own. And it's at this point we kind of reveal to us, the audience, that whatever this entity Kolchak is chasing, it's completely invisible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's clearly directly behind the projector box, like the control box, moving the controls. And we have like 12 shots of this projector box with nobody there and the controls moving with nobody touching it. And then just the projector moving. And it just went on for a really long time.
I have a question though about the entity / alien, this invisible thing. So it can clearly, when it's attacking someone or needs something, I think the assumption is it just pulled the marrow right out of the bones, right? Like there wasn't any puncture holes.
They said there were tooth holes or something. They did say there were like holes.
So when it was taking away the ingots, was it just holding them and then thus you couldn't see them because it was invisible, or was it like sucking it into its own entity? Is that a dumb question?
I would say that is the beauty, and I don't know if you guys will agree, but the beauty of this monster is they chose to make it invisible so that you didn't ever see it, but it also just lent it to the idea that like, oh man, this thing must look crazy. It must look so crazy, whatever this invisible thing is.
But it wasn't eating. Okay, so I misunderstood. I thought it was taking the electronics and the lead to fix its ship.
Yes, correct.
Like for that parts repair. But then also in the meantime, it had to eat because it had to eat, and it ate bone marrow. That was its thing. Okay,
that's correct.
Okay,
you've got it correct.
Right, but I agree with Jordan. It's like when the ingots disappeared, it's like, how did they disappear?
Scooped them up. I think Jordan's right. Just scooped them up in its arms.
Yeah, maybe.
Right. So then, based on this theory, if the entity had also grabbed Kolchak, he would also then be invisible.
Theoretically.
Right.
But that's why it tends not to grab things. It tends to push them with its wind power. Right. Yeah.
That was my favorite part about this invisible monster. I was just like, so good. It can be anything you want it to be.
Yeah.
What was it for you guys? What did you imagine it looked like? Did you have anything in your head?
It was the Mothman.
Oh, the Mothman. Okay, Jordan, how about you?
No, I actually just thought it was something that it just didn't have a form. I thought it was. That's why I thought it's weird later on when you see there's gonna be a ship sort of thing. I thought it was just a formless creature that just doesn't have a corporeal form.
Well, Kolchak will later attempt to explain why it's invisible by saying he once talked to a scientist who explained to him that humans don't see all of the bands of the light spectrum. Mm-hmm. So whatever this creature is lives in a different band of the light spectrum. That's why it appears invisible to us, but it is in fact not invisible.
Jane, what did you think it looked like?
I pictured it as like a blob. like a kind of like an amorphous blob that could move around and like, I don't know. I thought maybe because of that black goo stuff, it was kind of in my head. So I thought I kind of pictured this kind of black-ish
something that would
thing.
Kill a TNG regular off.
Yeah, something like that. It's something exactly like that. Yeah, and then it could kind of also that it could like change shape a little bit, so it could like whip a tentacle or an arm out and then like take it back into itself. So that's how it was like tossing people around. It would like suddenly, I like
it's very Lovecraftian. It's like you just do the work. You do the work and figure out what this thing looks like.
That's why I think it worked for me. Is I think they were really just like, you know what, whatever you want it to be, man. It's as scary as you want it to be. And I'm like, great, I love that. It's so scary to me now. At any rate, the entity finally attacks Kolchak here, and Kolchak, as I guess is his only form of self-defense, just starts snapping photos of it, and that drives the creature back. And at that exact moment, as he drives the creature back, cops swarm in, as they do on the show. Just like hundreds of cops swarm into the planetarium. They run at the control panel. Like, they immediately know to run at the control panel. And the creature just starts tossing them around like like little toys. It's the best. I love how much cops get tossed around on this show.
Mm-hmm.
And Kolchak explains to, I guess, the lieutenant who's with him, who's there at the other crime scenes. There's always like one lieutenant who's there for the entire episode, that he thinks that the flash he used may have hurt the entities. Like, I was flashing my camera at him and it drove him back. So so this lieutenant goes outside, finds the federal agents who are sitting in a car nearby, explains Kolchak's theory to them, and he comes back and he's like, all right, here's what we're going to do. We've got all these big lights on our cars. We're going to blast that creature as it comes out, kill him with our big lights. And they're like, we just need to get the creature to leave the planetarium. And I guess that part of the plan is they just throw more cops at the creature. The creature throws those cops around and then leaves the planetarium. And as Kolchak exits after the creature, it's like a war has happened.
Suddenly everything has exploded.
There are dead cops everywhere. Cop cars are in flames. Like, it's just like a war has happened. And he comes out and the police lieutenant's like, well, Kolchak, it just irritated it. It just irritated it and it killed hundreds of people.
I love how the cops like hate Kolchak, but then do what he says and then get mad at him that he was wrong and tell him that he's never going to work in this town again because you were wrong about your weird hypothesis that like the police didn't even have to do it. They just decided to agree with Kolchak and do his thing. And then they were wrong. And somehow it's all Kolchak's fault.
Gotta blame somebody.
I did like, though, that his first attempt was wrong. I'm glad it wasn't a thing where, it's something that gets boring in TV shows where, your main character's never wrong and they just always do the right thing, whether it's through accident or not. And we've seen it a little bit in this show where via accident he still wins. But I like that he was like, I've got it, guys. And it's like, oh, no, I don't. Sorry, 45 guys that just died.
I like that too, because what happens now is he actually just goes back inside to the planetarium and then recreates the scene of his attack by snapping photos again. And as he's doing, he's just like, oh, I wonder if it was the wine from my flash recharging that actually scared it. My bad.
Yeah, it's the noise of the battery recharging, I think. It's like a hum in the camera.
Yeah. Cops aren't interested anymore, though. They hate his theory. So Kolchak hops in his car and starts tracking the entity with his compass again. He knows he's close when his compass explodes. And this is where he goes into the forest, and he does finally find the entity's spacecraft sitting in the woods. And it's a real, 1950s Mars Attack style flying saucer.
Yeah, it's got these cute little metal legs that are sticking down and holding it up there. And a little hatch style door.
The creature shows up and attempts to attack Kolchak again, but of course he flashes his camera at him a few more times, and so the entity then just the door to the spaceship opens, which was very funny to me. I'm just like, why does it why does it have this door to the spaceship? But whatever. It gets in, and then I guess back to the mystery of why it makes things disappear. The spaceship doesn't launch, maybe because they didn't have the budget for it. The spaceship just vanishes like the ingots.
Mm-hmm. And now that I think about it, it may be that the alien had a cloaking device. Right?
Could be.
Because at first you'd be like, why would the alien exist on a different visual spectrum than his own ship? Right? If the alien was by nature invisible to the human eye, it would be likely that his own ship would also be invisible, but his ship was just sitting right there. So what is more likely is that the alien had a cloaking device so that he could go around and get the stuff that he needed and whatever. And then he also cloaked his ship when it flew away.
There you go.
That's my
Mystery
theory
solved.
Now. There we go.
There was just a moment there while you were talking where I was amused, and I just thought, I wonder if the people who wrote this episode 40-something years ago would think there's people discussing the possible cloaking mechanisms of this little prop ship they threw up real quickly.
I hope so. I hope that they had enough confidence in their own work to expect that it would be discussed many decades later.
Anyway, the episode concludes with what I think we now see as a staple of the show. Is there's a bit of a narration coda to every episode where Kolchak kind of gives you a bit of breakdown of what has happened or kind of explains the ideas behind the episode. And in this case, basically what he says is they would later try to build a park at Snake Rock where that UFO was. But what they discovered is that nothing would grow in the spot the UFO was sitting. Nothing would ever grow there again. So the government just paved the whole thing over. And he hypothesizes via a metaphor what has happened here. And that metaphor basically is, he says that perhaps it's like a traveler stopping to fix a flat tire on his way, but more on the cosmic scale.
Yeah, I think he says fix a flat tire and grab a meal or grab grab a bite to eat or something like that.
And what he's essentially saying is like the theory behind this episode, I guess, is that some sort of traveler through space had to make an emergency landing on Earth, had to get enough of stuff to like fix his car from the primitive Earthlings, and like he had to eat while he was here, and the only thing he could eat was the bone marrow out of living things. So this whole thing was just like an incident in this one like stopover by an alien who had to fix his ship, basically.
Yeah. And the alien was trying to be good. Like, he wasn't trying to attack people. He mostly went for animals. But, you know, there were just a couple of situations in which he ended up being forced to attack a human. So, you know, you can't blame him.
It's just an accident.
Yeah. He was just trying to get off the planet. I mean, he was in trouble. He's trying to get home.
Trying to suck some marrow. Big deal.
Yeah. He's trying to get home for Thanksgiving. What's going on?
Now, I want to see if you guys noticed this, because this is the exact premise to a Russian story that was turned into Andrei Tarkovsky's film Stalker.
I've never seen Stalker.
This is the exact premise to Stalker, is that it all takes place in a zone where an alien ship landed one time and fucked up all of the like basically laws of physics and biology in that space, because when it landed there, it just like whatever it did was so unworldly that it like destroyed the ecosystem, basically.
Right.
Now, Stalker, the movie, is made in 1979. 5 years after this episode. However, the original short story, Roadside Picnic, by Arkady Boris Strogatsky, is published in 1972. So 2 years before this episode.
Right.
However, according to Wikipedia, was never published in English until 1977. So I do think this episode is directly based on that short story. I don't think they read the short story necessarily, but I think they had heard the basic premise of like an alien lands. It doesn't interact with humans. It just kind of like, it's just an accident. Like it stops to fix a flat tire. Because that's the entire premise of this episode. Is just like, it's just a random circumstance that someone wanders into, and it leaves like this weird consequence. But it's not an invasion. It's not aliens you have to worry about. It's just an accident basically that happens, like a cosmic incident. And I really do feel like whoever wrote this episode definitely had, if not read that story, heard the premise to it and used it as sort of like the premise for the show.
In this episode, I kind of felt, because we'll talk about episode 4 in a minute, this almost felt in some ways a little bit like an outlier, because this next episode is very much more in tune with the first 2 episodes, where there's sort of a person doing crimes and he's out to catch them and sort of solve the crime, where this one was more like picking up pieces of something, and there's this more this vagueness to the whole episode. It was a little bit different.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It still stuck with the Monster of the Week premise and like the investigative Monster of the Week, but it did by the end of it, like it just felt like they had taken their usual Monster of the Week concept and like at least tweaked it enough to feel fresh.
Yeah, it was interesting because this was the first episode that I watched of the show. It was, and I didn't watch the TV movie. I was like, I want to watch episodes 3 and 4 first. This is what I'm supposed to do. I'll watch them fresh. So I really didn't know what to expect from it. And I did find it like it felt very strange and scattered. And then when I went on to episode 4, which we'll talk about in a minute, like it felt much more streamlined, and it felt much more like it had its own path, and it was sort of knew what it was trying to be. So I wonder if this episode was just kind of a random, like, okay, we need to come up with a bunch of concepts for this season. Here's some, and then somebody came up with this left field one, and they were like, well, let's just shove that in episode 3, and then we'll just, I don't know. We'll have to watch the rest of the series to see how many others were like that. But it being so clearly this like random kind of selection of mysteries seemed weird to me.
Well, let's move on to the next episode then. Here's the IMDb summary for episode 4, The Vampire.
May 2nd, 8:15 p.m. Airline stewardess Elena Munoz missed the detour sign and blew a steel-belted radial on a jagged rock. She cursed the power of advertising. She had no idea how cursed her evening really was.
Sent to L.A. to interview a controversial guru, Kolchak's more interested in tracking down and stopping an extremely vicious female vampire.
You know what I like? I like how even if you watch these 2 episodes, look at the titles of the episode. Episode 3 is They Have Been, They Are, They Will Be. And you're like, oh, what's this? This is weird and esoteric. And then in the next episode, The Vampire. I'm like, well, you know what? You're getting in this one.
It is true. Like the first 2, it was the Ripper, the zombie, the vampire. Yeah. And then there's the third one's just like really out there.
That's what I mean. I have a feeling that maybe there might be another one of these, but I have a feeling this is going to be an episode that is different than these other episodes. At least for the first 4, it's different in the structure and the actual plot mechanics.
Yeah. This one opens on another great shot. These openings always have great shots, but it's like a woman stopping because she has a flat tire in this road construction site, and as she's trying to fix it, like just arms start crawling out of the ground and like waving in the moonlight, and it was a very freaky sequence. It felt very X-Filesy to me.
Yeah, it was great, except she didn't get killed. Which
I know,
was also
she survived.
Nice. She runs away and gets the police, and then comes back and they don't find anything. So then the police decide she's a crank, but
yeah.
But
we know
she was, telling the truth. But yeah, it was nice to not have her because, like, of course, the first thing you expect is that she's going to be killed.
Yeah, I thought she was dead for sure.
Yeah.
Not this time. They're really shaking things up on this show. We then cut, of course, to the INS newspaper office where Kolchak's being visited by an old friend from Vegas dropping by to collect a debt. Jim, the Swede Bratowski.
And I can't remember. Is he wearing a gigantic bow tie?
Yeah, neon orange bow tie. It's amazing.
That's right. He
actually now goes by James Bright as he's changed careers to be a TV anchor in Cincinnati. There's so much backstory for this guy. I love it.
It's great. And then there's this whole thing about how, Kolchak should stop writing for the newspaper and get into TV and get a new suit because that's where, the business is at. And then his colleague, this other writer,
Updike.
is like, Updike, super interested in getting into TV and wants to talk to the news anchor about it. And yeah, it's like there's this whole other thing happening.
It's very good. And like the Swede is there to get his money, but as he's there, he's mentioning to Kolchak a series of mysterious deaths that have sort of cropped up in Vegas that he's just like, yeah, they've cropped up. They seem to be going from Vegas toward LA, but the police are really trying to cover it up. You know how it is. I believe Swede has one of my favorite lines in these 2 episodes is I believe as he's talking about how the police are trying to like keep these deaths under wraps. And as he puts it, he says, quote, "The lid is on the pot, but you can sure smell something is cooking." And I'm just like, that is the best. That is the best line for a cover up. It's just like the lid's on the pot, but you can smell something's cooking. I love this. I love the dialogue on this show. At any rate, he mentions all the bodies have been drained of blood, and of course, Kolchak's like he's hot for the story because he dealt with a vampire in Vegas 3 years ago. So this feels right up his alley.
Yeah, he seems very excited about the vampire.
I was going to say, now, Luke, I know you've watched the TV movie, and Jane, you've watched one of them. Was it the vampire one you watched?
The first one is vampires.
So how similar is this? I know we're going to go through it, but is this essentially the same plot as the TV movie, or is that just more like that just colors his experience?
It's a bit of a different story. I mean, it's related. So Luke is going to explain this in a minute, but the vampire that exists in this episode was created by the vampire from the original movie.
Oh,
it's a direct sequel. This is a direct sequel.
Yeah, it's a sequel. So this vampire is related in that way to that vampire that died. And no, but it's different. It's a different plot. There's different types of subsidiary characters. It's not a retread.
Yeah, I was worried about that too because Jane, you didn't see it, but the very first episode of the series is a retread of the movie. Of the vampire story? Yeah, but without a vampire. But it's essentially the exact same plot. So I was really worried I was going to walk the same lines again. But it is it's a story in its own right. And actually, apparently, this script was originally written to be a third film called The Night Killers. That was going to be set in New York when Vincenzo and Kolchak went to New York before the series got greenlit, and they basically repurposed it and rebuilt it into an episode of the show. But the idea was this might have been a third film in the series. I see. At any rate, Kolchak can't get any more information out of the Swede because the Swede sees Vincenzo coming back to the office, and he's like, I gotta run. Because as Vincenzo enters, she's like, hey, was that the Swede? He owes me $500 from Vegas. And we're like, so many people have gambling debts. Classic newspaper men, I guess. I
like it, though. All this stuff really does build the world, and it gives you a sense that they're real people living in a real world, and there's other things happening other than the plot, and I think the show does a really good job at that.
Yeah, I have like, it feels like those TV movies exist in this world. Like they like it's time about how they used to be in Vegas and work there. Now they're here. Like it does feel like there's a world building here. Mm-hmm. Vincenzo has recently received an order from the head office in New York. He has to send one reporter to LA to do a profile of a 15-year-old guru named Amarta Mira. who's getting married soon. And the reason he has to send a reporter from Chicago to L.A. is that I guess the INS office in L.A., 4 of their reporters were hospitalized after a station wagon rollover.
Yeah, I like that was the way they're just like, we got to get him over there. Like, I don't know, they had a car accident, all of them.
And then what I like is Vincenzo's telling him this, and Updike's really into doing the profile on his guru because he's like read a book about gurus recently. And we all know Kolchak now wants to go to L.A. because he knows a vampire might be on the loose there. But instead of Kolchak asking for the story, he basically negs Vincenzo. Yeah. Like, he negs him so hard until Vincenzo wants to give him the story while Kolchak pretends not to want it. And the whole time, Updike's standing there watching it happen, being like, no, I want story. Don't do this.
He reverse psychologies on Vincenzo big time.
It's very funny. But it's really just an excuse to get him to L.A. And in L.A., they don't waste any time. The vampire who will come to learn is named Catherine Rollins.
Right. She's arrived in L.A., and for some weird coincidence, she bumps into her sister's boyfriend on the street.
They head back to the apartment the boyfriend and the sister share. She immediately starts making out with him, and he's into it. Then she, as a vampire, murders him. Her sister enters the house, sees what's happening, also gets murdered. A lot of murder right off the top. This woman kills off her whole family.
Every time the actress has to be a vampire, it made me laugh because she's so over the top with her vampire antics. Like the sort of I don't know, baring of her teeth and stuff is so big. It made me laugh every time.
Yeah, and the sound effect that they put on is
that's right.
This crazy hissing sound that's like sort of like a cat, basically, but clearly is being done by a person. And it's so loud and ridiculous.
Yeah, it's funny every time. But there's the real worry is if you think you're gonna there's gonna be confusion that she's a vampire. That's not happening.
Oh, she's 100% a vampire. Don't worry. There's no mystery.
Yeah.
Well, and this was where I was really seeing like it was this very like police procedural thing where it's like you just watch her killing people like constantly, and then you watch Kolchak like trying to find her. There was never any doubt as to what she was at all.
Is Kolchak basically hits the streets running. He arrives in L.A., hears about another vampire attack that happened in Barstow on the way to L.A., drives out there, has a weird tete-a-tete with a local police chief, and basically discovers, yes, another man had his blood sucked out, and that they were driving a car that had a completely blacked out window. So definitely a vampire. We're on the hunt for a vampire.
Well, he's decided it's a vampire, and so now he's confirming things with info. He's like, I think it's a vampire. Oh, blacked out windows, you say? Yes, it must be a vampire.
He knows what he's after.
Yeah.
But of course he has to do that profile on the guru, so he decides he'll pop by and do the guru story real quick. But when he arrives, he's a little late, and the guru has already left for Dallas permanently.
Yeah. I don't know if we properly articulated. He's supposed to have gone to LA to do the story on the guru, but what he really wants to do is this other case. But he still needs to go through the motions and get the story, but he's now blown it because the guru's already left.
That's true. But thankfully, the guru's realtor, Faye Kruger, is there trying to sell his LA house. You guys, this house had 8 bedrooms, 4.5 baths, and Etruscan marble fireplaces. How much did she say this house cost?
I think it was $4.5 million, wasn't it?
No, I think it was $545,000, something like that.
That was it?
Yeah.
I thought it was in the millions.
She said it was $525,500.
$525,500. There you go. Yeah.
What does that mean? What does that mean? How much is $525,500? $5,025?
No, $525,000.
All right, great. That didn't make any sense to me.
In the 70s, for a house that would probably now be worth like maybe $3 million. Makes sense.
That's good. That was a good price for that house. Kolchak should have bought it.
Definitely.
I think it'd be more than $3 million.
Well, it depends where it is.
That's true.
I don't know how many LA real estate shows you watch, Jordan, but I know what I'm talking about.
It's not one of those neighborhoods where they're still stealing TVs, is it?
Oh, I certainly hope not, but you never can tell. LA, you never know what to expect.
True.
Anyway, luckily for Kolchak, Faye, the realtor, has spent a lot of time with this guru, and she also used to be a reporter. She went to school for it. She's been thinking about getting back in the game, so Kolchak offers to let her write his profile for him, and that'll get her back into reporting. He'll of course need to keep the byline for himself, but it'll be her way back in, and she's just like, sounds great, I'll write your story.
I thought that was a pretty funny little kind of subplot that, he still needs to get his story done. He can kind of help her, but not really, because he's doing it for his own gain. And it just kind of runs through the rest of the episode where she keeps, wanting him to help her with this story, and he's not that interested because he's too busy vampire hunting.
Yeah, I mean, it's not really a big part of it, but every now and then he checks back in with her, and he's like, how's this story going? She's like, therefore, utmost great. And he's like, what? What are you writing on this story?
How do you spell magically? 1 L or 2? But then she basically just ends up writing a real estate story about the house, which is also hilarious.
It's very funny.
Yeah.
Because Kolchak keeps saying he's going to proofread it before she sends it on the wire, and he's so busy he's just like, whatever, just send it on the wire. And then Vincenzo he's like, what have you written? Why is there so much information about the house in this article?
Does it say that the guru has copper pipes in his house? Why is this important?
It is a weird, funny runner through the thing of just Vincenzo getting these weird stories written by Kolchak, but the woman who's writing it is just like not doing a great job. And Kolchak doesn't seem to care at all.
Yeah.
At any rate, this gives Kolchak the time to investigate the vampire. And he finds out the LA police have already arrested 2 suspects for all these blood-sucking murders related to a local coven named the Dark Star Coven.
I loved it. I love the Dark Star Coven.
It's great because he goes to a press conference, and all the reporters there aren't buying the story, but like the police are just like, nope, this is what's happening.
And they call them warlocks. They say they've got 2 warlocks in jail.
Well, they might have requested that. They're like, if you're gonna book me, please call me a warlock. But the lieutenant was played by William Daniels. Did you ever see it?
It was Mr. Feeney.
And I more know him as the voice of Kit.
I know Jordan would call him Kit.
I did not recognize this man at all.
No? Oh, I was excited to see him.
At any rate, Kolchak hears what's kind of the police cover-up's already in process, so he goes to check out the crime scene where the murders happened. Here he finds this lieutenant who was giving the press conference, and obviously the lieutenant's also having his doubts about these warlocks, and Kolchak really pitches him on the idea of vampire might be behind it, but this lieutenant doesn't, like all police, he doesn't want to hear it. He doesn't want to hear Kolchak's theories. But Kolchak does manage to get a lead out of the building supervisor, who he kind of like plays it like he might be a cop, and the building supervisor kind of tells him that the dead woman had a sister who had moved to Vegas several years ago and went missing. And now that this woman's dead, he noticed a lot of her clothes are missing. And Kolchak kind of is like, oh, interesting. Do you know where the dead woman worked? And he gets the lead that she worked at Grace's Catering. All kinds of strange hours.
Yeah. It comes out real quick that this catering service is just a front for a prostitution ring, but they sort of like play like at first it's like a very playful thing. What do they say instead of like turning tricks? They're like, she did somersaults or something like that.
Yeah. Stunts.
Yeah, she's doing stunts. Yeah.
Instead of tricks. But
that'd be my dad. If you ask my dad, that's what he said. She was doing stunts.
But Kolchak is like, oh, I wonder if they're listed under restaurants in the yellow pages. No.
He does finally track down the phone number and calls them up, and he talks to the head pimp, or as he's referred to in the show, the Mac Daddy.
Do they call him that?
Yeah, someone says
she calls him. The girl calls him her Mac Daddy.
Her Mac Daddy.
Yeah.
A man named Ichabod Grace.
Yeah, right. There's not too many men named Ichabod anymore these days.
He looked like an Ichabod too. He was well cast.
Mm-hmm.
He's sort of like got that like had that kind of tall, long look to him.
He reveals that Catherine the vampire has indeed started working for him recently, and Kolchak basically books a date with her for that evening. He's like,
he doesn't know that she's a vampire. He wasn't like,
know.
Yes, Catherine the vampire is now available.
He doesn't know. He would never have hired a vampire had he known.
I'm just saying, if this whole plot didn't go forward, she would have made a terrible prostitute. Like her, she has no return business. She eats everyone, or whatever, sucks their blood. Doesn't eat them. She sucks their blood. So like,
yeah, but I guess
that's not a recipe for success.
If she gets paid first, then she's still bringing money back to the pimp. And the thing is that there's a lot of business travelers, so you're not necessarily expecting return business. It's like, they're going to be in town and then they're going to be gone. All
right, Jane, you would run a better prostitution ring than I could. We get it.
Okay.
All right.
Luke, you would do okay too.
I'm gonna get back on track. I'm gonna try to get back on track. So Kolchak has ordered Catherine to come by his hotel that night. He sets up. He puts a big cross on the wall. He's getting ready. The woman who comes by. Turns out she's not Catherine. It's just another woman who was sent over to see him. And she basically reveals like, oh yeah, Catherine was supposed to come to your place at 8, but she got a better call. Apparently, one of the players for the football team, the LA Rams, had called in for a girl, so she was sent over to his place instead.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and that scene was also hilarious where Kolchak is like prepared to receive her, and he thinks she's going to be the vampire, and he's going to get ready to get her. So he turns all the lights off in his hotel room, opens the door, and then the woman walks in, and then he closes the door behind her, and then flips the lights on and like throws the cross in her face, and is like holding a stake and is like ready to get her, and she's just like, what kind of kink is this? Like, what kind of game are you playing? Like, what are you into, honey? Like, anyway, it's great. I thought it was great.
It was a very funny sequence. I also like that at some point when Kolchak's preparing, he just reaches into his bag and pulls out like a mallet and a stake. I'm like, does he travel with that, or did he have that specially made recently?
I felt like he had made the stake himself. That's how I felt and the mallet was just like a hardware store kind of mallet.
I mean, it did feel genuinely like he had dealt with a vampire before, and he was very prepared to deal with one again.
Well, I mean, I guess maybe you're right. Maybe he was just carrying that around from the last time he murdered somebody.
I loved it. I loved it a lot. At any rate, now that Kolchak realizes this isn't Catherine, we cut to the football player's house where the football player and the vampire are laying next to his fireplace, giving each other the daintiest little kisses. Just so dainty really little kisses they're giving each other. Smooch, smooch, smooch.
But then the football player is just kind of also just lying there. Like he's not even very actively trying to do anything. They like smooch a little bit, and then he just is like he's falling asleep or passing out or something.
He probably just had a big game.
I guess.
He just called her over for some smooches so he could get to sleep. And then like things start getting really insane because they're like Kolchak's monologue just like, but then the rest of the football team dropped by to play a prank on their best friend, this football player. And then you have like four other like giant guys walk in as they're like laying on the ground. At which point the vampire just starts like murdering every football player in the room.
Yeah, what was the prank supposed to be? That they were going to walk in on the middle of the thing?
It's not even clear if they knew he was going to have a girl over. It's just like they just also showed up, as I guess is the idea.
No, it was because I think the other prostitute had said that. I don't think it was the football player ordered her. I think it was his friends.
Oh, so this was all just a prank to humiliate him because he didn't know how to have sex. He only knew how to give little smooches.
I think that's it.
They're going to walk in and be like, look at you, you
just
fool.
Point and laugh. Oh, male bonding.
But really, the point of it is they want to get like a bunch of really big stuntmen in a room with a vampire, so the vampire can essentially throw them all over the room, so we can see how powerful the vampire is.
And there was so much more somersaulting, which is my favorite thing.
It is the one thing I really like about the show, which I would think at some point would get boring to me, but I every episode they really like to show you that whatever the supernatural entity is, it's so much more powerful than anything, like any human being. So they have to show you it just like tossing men around like they're rag dolls. And I every time I like really enjoy it. Kolchak, of course, arrives mid football murder. He like walks in as usual, starts snapping photos of like these football players getting murdered. The vampire attacks him. His camera gets tossed in the fire, also per usual, so he can lose the footage he has. And he, of course, knows he's a vampire, so he's able to make a makeshift cross and drive the vampire away. And as soon as he does that, as always, police swarm the room. Just police swarm into the building as soon as the vampire leaves.
I was sure he was going to get arrested here, as he has several times, that they were going to blame him for the murders, but it's not really a thing.
It isn't, no. And he's always just standing there. But I think at this point, like the police departments know him well enough that they're just like, oh, it's just that annoying guy Kolchak who got there before us. But like, there's never a question of like how he got onto the property, whether or not he might be trespassing, whether he's supposed to be there, whether he's interfering with the crime scene. Like nobody cares. In one of the first episodes, he just like drives on the sidewalk and says, "Don't worry, I'm press." Like it's like this is how this.
It's a different time. It was the 70s. It was a different time. And this is where that lieutenant, I believe you called him Mr. Feeney. Mr. Feeney's back.
Mr. Feeney. Mm-hmm. I believe his name is Lieutenant Mateo. I wrote it down.
Lieutenant Mateo. And he basically is just like, Kolchak's like, it's a vampire. And he's like, listen, that's enough of this, Kolchak. Pack your stuff. Be out of the city by 6 a.m. And this really gets to Kolchak because he rushes back to his apartment or his hotel room, starts throwing all his stuff in a bag. And this Faye woman she's still there trying to write this guru story. And as he's tossing all his stuff into his luggage to get out of town, Faye's just like mentions something about not wanting to be a reporter anymore. She's like, thanks for letting me write this story for you, but I'm going to go back to being a realtor. And this causes Kolchak to think, hey, wait a minute. You're a realtor. Where's this vampire living? That's the key to this story. And she happens to tell him that, like, oh, yeah, you can get a listing of all the properties sold and rented in the last week if you want. And this is how Kolchak is able to pinpoint that the vampire has rented a rundown old mansion in the Hollywood Hills.
Which looks just like a vampire castle. It's amazing. It's this amazing, like, it's
got
like a turret, like a witch's hat roof on it. It was amazing. It was awesome.
I think he was looking through. He's like, new house, new house, new house. Oh, creepy old haunted house. That's the one.
I think in his monologue at some point, he does almost say specifically, it's like, it was the perfect place for a vampire. Okay. He met that one, and now he's stereotyped them all. Anyway, Kolchak heads off to the Hollywood Hills to this mansion where he sets up a trap for the vampire. We don't get to see what it is till the end, but we see him showing up with a can of gas, and then we see him, as he always does when he goes into his, Jordan will know this, if he goes to any sort of creepy old haunted house, he stumbles around comically, falling over a lot for a while.
Yeah.
He knocks things over. He's like, I
love how clumsy this character is. He's just so clumsy. Like Mr. Bean level.
Being quiet and sneaky is not his strong point.
But his whole body language is like he's always got his camera and his tape recorder dangling off of his arm on a strap, and he's always his jacket's always kind of undone, and he always looks like he's kind of falling instead of walking pretty much everywhere. Yeah.
But of course, this is part of the plan, I think, because all this stumbling attracts the vampire's attention. And when the vampire sees him, Kolchak takes off. He runs off into the sort of area behind the house, up into the Hollywood Hills. And what he's done is he set up a trap at the famous landmark in LA, the Hollywood Cross. It's a big white cross in the Hollywood Hills. He has doused the whole thing in gasoline.
That was my question. Is that a famous thing?
Yes, apparently it is.
See, that's why I was confused, because I guess I don't know my local LA info, but like I was like, did he put that cross there?
So there was a shot which you probably missed. And when he drives into LA, he actually drives by it and looks up and sees it on the hill.
I didn't see that.
Which the first time I watched the episode, I didn't see that, and I thought also that he had placed the cross there. But then when I watched it again, I realized that no, it was established already.
When he's driving around looking at the pancake building you talked about earlier, like the Capitol Records building, they're cutting to shots of LA landmarks, and that's one of the ones he looks at.
I see.
You were too busy laughing at men with eyeshadow on. You were just rolling on the floor.
That's right.
Like, men with eyeshadow? What a thing.
Well, I was laughing at Kolchak. That's why.
Anyway, he leads her back to this cross, which she's doused in gasoline. So as she chases him, he tosses a match on it. The entire cross just bursts into flames. Like, there's a huge flaming cross. And then he's also doused, I guess, a circle of gasoline around sort of the area around the cross, which also lights up, essentially trapping Kolchak and the vampire in a circle of flames in front of a flaming cross, which causes the vampire just to collapse. It's all too much for this vampire.
I don't know my vampire lore that well, but is fire one of the things that hurt a vampire?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because it's like sunlight kind of. So
I see. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think you can burn a vampire, and also the big cross is there. So I think it's supposed to be the combination of things, just kind of knocks her on her ass. And what has to be my favorite scene of the show? It looks great. This whole sequence looks amazing because it's in the middle of the night. There's just flames everywhere, and Kolchak pulls out the stake and the mallet to drive into her heart. And as he's about to do it, Lieutenant Mateo shows up with a bunch of cops, and they're just standing there watching Kolchak just brutally drive a stake into this woman's chest, just smash it, flames everywhere, a huge burning cross, cops just watching a man just brutalize this woman. And it just that's how it ends. And it cuts to the coda that ends all these episodes where Kolchak explains what's happened. And it cuts to that, and Kolchak's like, and I was booked for murder.
As I expected, I was booked for murder. Because that's what happened in the first one, in the movie, right? He got booked for murder for that other vampire.
I was like, fair enough. It definitely looked like you murdered that woman in front of all those cops at the end of that episode.
But he was let go, and why was he let go?
he was let go because the autopsy report on the woman showed that she had been dead for at least 3 years.
Mm-hmm. So Kolchak was let free and got to get back on that plane back to Chicago.
Yeah. He loves technicalities.
It's truly. It was a great climax. I gotta say, this might be one of the best climaxes this show's done. Yeah. Like the flaming
I also
cross.
really liked how he was like, it was a local landmark, so naturally I had to pay for the new one.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. He says he has to pay for the local landmark too. Which is very funny.
Again, it's just like one of those little flourishes. It's like if he hadn't said that, no one would have cared. Like no one watching the show would have been like, "But wait, it's a local landmark. Aren't they going to charge him?" No, but they have to put that in of him saying that, which just kind of grounds everything in this like really funny, believable way that I think makes the show quite appealing.
It's a nice ending to the episode for sure. I think I don't know. Do you guys have any final notes on these 2 episodes? Because that kind of wraps up that plot. Do you guys have anything you want to talk about these last 2 that we didn't cover before we get to ratings?
I think we do the ratings.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Well, Jane, as you are our guest, and how this usually works is, what do you want to give out of 10 to the "They Have Been, They Are, They Will Be" episode?
Because it was a bit muddled and I wasn't sure about it, I would probably give that like maybe a 6.
6.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan, what do you think?
I feel very similar. I would give it a 6 as well, except I'm going to give it an extra point to a 6.5 because I think it was different. I think where it loses me a little bit is the execution. I think it's a little more confused than it needs to be. Like, it felt a little scattershot, the episode, but I like that it was different than the other episodes. So I'll give it a 6.5. It's almost there.
I think it was perfectly executed. Like, I actually don't think there was mistakes made. I think they meant everything they did in it. I think it suffers from being like having to be made for television. Like, I don't think they could get into some of the bigger ideas they were futzing around with a little bit. But I honestly, I think this is my favorite episode of Kolchak. I think it was like, if they did it this way more, where it was a little more like they were trying to do something a little more than just Monster of the Week, I think that would get. I'm giving it a full 8.
Wow. Impressive.
I don't know if they'll make a better episode this year. I don't think there'll be a better episode of Kolchak.
Really? That's quite the challenge. You still have like 15 episodes left.
I just don't think they'll do it. I think it's going to fall to Monster of the Week too much. I think this is the best version they'll do.
I think that is a good lead to the next episode because I didn't love that episode, but I get why you liked it, Luke, and I think there was elements of a lot of interesting things there. Again, I think the execution was a little bit off. I mean, we probably disagree on that. But after watching the 3rd episode, and I was like, oh, that was okay. Then I watched the 4th episode, and I think I appreciated the 3rd one more because I was like, oh, we're back to this again. And it did feel a little bit like, I'm scared that this show is sort of hit a level and it's just going to stay there. Like, it's not going to get any better. It's not, I don't see it getting any worse, but it seems like it's worse than might be that we're just repeating itself. So I'm only going to give this one a 6. What do you think, Jane?
Yeah. So that's interesting because I watched it, like I had only watched episode 3 and 4. So I didn't initially have the point of reference of the TV movie also being vampires or any of that kind of stuff. And so I thought episode 4 was quite like good. Like I thought it was like interesting and well executed, and it had like a really good through line. And so in that sense, I would probably give it like an 8, but I do appreciate what you're saying about, it's actually kind of a retread of the same thing. And I'm not sure how it compares to the first, episodes 1 and 2, which I also haven't watched. So if that's starting to feel like a repetitive structure or repetitive kind of style, then I could see why you would rate it lower. But for me, just coming in and watching those 2 episodes, I would give episode 4 an 8 myself.
Yeah, I actually think the vampire is much better done than the first 2 episodes. I think
I would agree. I would agree with you, but don't you feel like it's interchangeable with them? Don't you think?
I felt it was significantally better. And
really,
yeah, I thought it was significantly better than the first 2.
Even with that hissing,
it didn't bother me at all. The hissing didn't bother me at all. I don't think I liked it as much. I think you're right. The Monster of the Week thing is a potential weakness, but I still think even with the concept that it is a Monster of the Week, they still it still felt fresher than the first 2. I think they brought some new stuff to it. It had the problems that Kolchak has of some convenience. They always have conveniences, like why has he got to go to LA? How does he find out about this thing? But they do an okay job of making it a funny reason these things sort of happen. I'm going to give it a 7.
Plus, I really enjoyed the realtor. I thought that character and that whole subplot was just hilarious.
That's what I think. I think it's fine. We were seeing Updike. The little side characters are very funny. I don't know. I think it is finding its footing. And if it has to be Monster of the Week, at least it feels fun.
Agreed.
Yeah. But I'll be curious to know if it changes in either direction, if we do start feeling that we've seen it a million times, or if it gets to a level of, it starts breaking new ground. I'll be interested to see, because there is so many episodes that we have to get through. So I'll be curious to see how it kind of unfolds.
I'm going to give it this, Jordan, and you'll understand this, is we just watched Supertrain, where every episode was the exact same kidnapping, where they couldn't find anything fresh or new to do in each episode, where at least these ones are like, they're treading similar ground, but at least they don't feel harder to watch.
Well, and also if you think about two shows that are sort of in the same time period, this is actually earlier than Supertrain, and they've done a better job of creating a world and side characters, and it just feels like an actual alive, real place and people, whereas in Supertrain, it didn't at all.
Yeah, you want to live in Kolchak world, not Supertrain world.
Yeah, exactly. Unless you love dancing, then Supertrain's for you.
I really need to get listening to these Supertrain podcasts. I think it sounds like
you're fine.
It's highly exciting.
No,
I've never even heard of this show, so now I'm looking that up. But yeah, I mean, the other thing too is obviously, like any of these shows, I think Kolchak I hope that we'll find that it is very much like a well-written cop show, which is that it is repetitive because you have a genre and you have viewers that go in expecting a certain type of storyline every week. And so you can't deviate too much from that. And it's still a show from the 70s. So they're not going to rely too much on previous knowledge of previous episodes when you watch it, right? Like it's everything's going to be self-contained. So that you can't avoid. But hopefully it will be, there'll be enough variety in the types of adventures that he has to keep it going.
Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention that, Jane, you alluded to at the beginning of this podcast is that at least one of these episodes was written by David Chase, most commonly known for The Sopranos, who I believe, Luke, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe this was his first writing gig in a writing room.
Yeah, it was his first story editor job. So he worked on all 20 episodes.
Yeah, he comes up at variously as a story consultant or having written it. So he was clearly on the writing staff in some way.
We'll get into
but I don't think there's any sense that this is like future Sopranos feeling. There's none of that in this.
I mean, you can see a certain flair for dialogue.
Yeah, good writing is good writing, right? Like if, that's the other thing is like you start to see that the people that were on this show went off to do other things, even though the show only lasted a season, is that it actually had really good talent on it. So,
well, that about wraps it up. So, Jane, thank you for joining us as always.
Thanks for having me. And I'm really excited to watch more of the show. And I'm going to listen to the rest of your episodes too. I hope that it is fruitful and fun.
I hope it's fruitful and fun too. That's our new motto, fruitful and fun.
Continuing
I think
drag.
It will be. I think you can sometimes get a sense. I mean, Luke, I think you'd agree with me. Usually, right off the bat, you're going to go, "Oh no, this is going to be a show that's going to be hard to watch." And I don't get the sense with Kolchak. It's always like, "Oh, let's see what adventure he's up to this week."
Yeah. I honestly, the only thing that's a struggle for me is just like the format of the like editing and storytelling from the 70s. Like, I just wish it wasn't 51 minutes long. If it was like a tight 44, it would have been like perfect.
They are long,
but that's just you can't fault the time. Like, this is how TV was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
At any rate, that wraps up for this episode. So, listener, you can email us as always at continuumdrag@gmail.com, and on Instagram and Twitter we'll have some clips from this episode. I don't know, a cheetah being murdered probably.
Well, you don't actually see the cheetah get murdered.
You have to put in the somersaults.
So many police tossed around.
And the burning cross. I mean, come on.
Oh, yeah. There'll be a burning cross.
Various iconic images from these episodes that you could put up on Instagram.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. But that wraps it up. So, listener, thank you for joining us. And Jordan, I'll see you next week.
See you then.
Bye, guys.
Continuum Drag is recorded in Toronto, Ontario. Theme music by James Rex Seidler. Produced by Jordan Dullock and Luke Black. Special thanks to Aaron Yunes.